While Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is ultimately a remarkable game, as it delivers on the romanticism of its concepts, when it comes to its gameplay, especially around the edges of such, it's nothing short of a hot mess. That even with the juicy center of the combat being the it factor of this game, is when the combat of this game flows, it fucking gushes, there's still a slew of issues all over that if improved or designed differently could have made this game, and I try not to sensationalize things too much, or so I like to think, it could have made this game the best action game there is. At least to me anyway. As for a long while now, I've wanted to see a game with this sort of intense, intimate sword clashing combat, and to get it from one of my favorite developers only for it to be imperfect has left me with plenty to say. So, for as harsh as I'll be at times throughout this critique, it's out of care and love for the game. As mentally abusive as that might sound. Oh god. But anyway, before getting into the nitty gritty, I need to preface this, or I should preface this critique with something worth noting about the game as a whole, as I think it'll be insightful. Eye-granting, if you will, to many veteran From Software players who felt something was off about this game as to why it may have not clicked like their other recent games have. So, unlike the previous action-centered works From Software has delivered in recent years, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is an action-adventure game, meaning the design direction of the game is that of creating gameplay and systems revolving around puzzle elements, tools to solve them, and exact or optimal means of dealing with a given situation, rather than the simple, reactionary combat of the Soulsborne games where much of the player's enjoyment is derived from their personal playstyle, i.e., the role-playing aspect of the game. Duh. This adventure direction in Sekiro does have some immense benefits though, as it can deepen combat by increasing considerations and expand the potential enemy variety, as well as the means of dealing with them. All the while, it's appropriate to the shinobi motif and overall concept of the game. It fits. But while the idea of this direction is fine, when it comes to Sekiro's combat, there's a lack of cohesive direction between the action and adventure sides of the game, and that because of this, both end up stifled and lacking in terms of implementation and balance throughout their key components and systems, especially in the more prolific ones such as the skills, combat arts, and of course, the shinobi tools. A lot to say about them. But even then, when looking at the two aspects separately, as you mostly do when playing the game, there's still some higher level conceptual design I wish was different, or had more to it that I think would have alleviated some issues with the combat and just made the game overall more engaging. So I'm going to dig into all these pieces by critiquing and presenting alternative designs to what exists now. I'm going to start on the higher level pieces at the conceptual level of design and work into more tangible issues like the balance of the shinobi tools and whatever else I had mentioned, right? And by the end, I think you'll see there's a general design I try to point everything towards, but please, just take what you want from each of these bits, if any at all, and find your own direction or ideal design for this game. Or just like what I present, which, hey, that's what I'm here for, right? Alright, all good then? Cool. Let's get this class started. Sekiro is an action game before anything else, and at its most reduced state of swinging a sword and deflecting/blocking attacks, the primary flow of combat is that of opposing units taking turns attacking and defending, volleying back and forth until a decisive action occurs, and or resetting to neutral wherein a unit can effectively gain turn order advantage or outright win an exchange of actions. Now, while this core design affords some seriously intense fights and the game encourages a proactive approach to combat versus a mostly reactive one, the conveyance or clarity as to whose turn it is was often muddy and felt wrong at times, as there were numerous instances of enemies powering through my attack from neutral, or even when it seemed to be my turn, because I'm honestly not too sure. I suppose I should just stop mashing R1 and it really wasn't my turn. While this ultimately is a minor issue and the back and forth dynamic in this game works fine, especially in fights like Genichiro's, as the ebb and flow of turns in neutral is mostly even between Wolf and Geni instead of one-sided in his favor like most other bosses, there is still something to be said about a fair feeling and balanced neutral game, and that everything presented to the player should make sense. So a design that leaned more into the neutral dynamic, by the player needing to make decisive and appropriate guesses or reactions to the opponent to begin a back and forth onslaught, would alleviate such issues mentioned, and honestly, more importantly, It would play more into the romanticism of what people think of when it comes to samurai shinobi sword fights. As while attacking and defending is fine, two deadly strikes canceling each other out is really what it's all about. So here's a design with all that in mind. When two or more opposing units perform an offensive action at another, instead of one attack winning wholesale or damage being traded between the oppositions, the actions clash off of each other, and both sides receive posture damage or a unique result like maybe a power struggle if evenly matched, based on the difference in power and timing of the attacks. The units that clash then quickly reset to neutral, with the speed of recovery being determined by the result of the exchange, meaning the winner of the clash can then act sooner than the loser. However, if the blows were nearly even in power, there might be no difference in recovery time. This would probably be determined in thresholds rather than purely dynamic. But if this sounds to be too much, just gaining proper turn advantage from winning the exchange works for me. But I have a bit more fanfic design to deepen this. As additionally with this design, Wolf's attack string, or really any attack string, could matter substantially more than it does, and different weapons could have a place as a primary offensive means for Wolf. Different bits of a weapon's attack string could vary in power and speed, so offensive strikes could be taken in between blocks and deflects to challenge the opponent's turn, and create a deeper, more proactive sword clashing dynamic where learning a weapon's moveset becomes invaluable to mastering combat. But, to even further enhance this design, getting into some real fanfic now, a weapon's attack string isn't reset when the player stops attacking. That instead, whatever piece of the weapon's attack string that was up next is still performed on the next attack input. That is as long as Wolf receives no damage, and that it's performed within a certain time frame that gets smaller and smaller with each subsequent strike, with one of the ultimate goals in combat then being to reach the finisher in a weapon string to deliver a devastating blow, whatever that happens to mean. Though, going this far, a design like this would need to be in a combat system designed around nearly constant neutral reset rather than one that's more pattern and puzzle focused like Sekiro, though I wouldn't be upset if Sekiro moved in that direction next time around. Regardless, it's strange to me that all this wasn't part of the core design at some level. That all said though, if enemies just got knocked out of weaker attacks when hit, or some conveyance was provided to tell the player this enemy cannot be knocked out of an attack right now, then that's all that'd really be needed. But moving on, let's talk about some more concrete problems, starting with the atrocious Spirit Emblem system, as it trickles down into a few things I'll talk about later. Frankly, the Spirit Emblem system, and more so the balance around such, is a boring hindrance tied to the coolest elements in this game. That while the pieces that use them can devastate when applied properly, and even still work out pretty good universally, the problem is that I, the player, want to be doing the cool, flashy, and potent combat options frequently without having to worry about a limited resource. A limited resource that's also used for the combat options that are answers to scenarios with exact solutions that this game's adventure-inclined design is defined by, meaning the radical things I want to do are sidelined for the things I must do. And then to top all that off, the things I may want to do might not even be as good as other options within its own system, but this last bit's for much later. I don't hate the idea of a precious, limited resource that's per stretch of level or per boss attempt that's used for the big damage or for safety, but it alone, especially how it exists, just isn't fun. If there was an additional resource that could be expended for the combat arts and tools so they could operate in more universal ways for flavor rather than optimization or necessity, I feel that a significant number of issues and disgruntled feelings among players would have been alleviated, which is really the crux of my issues with this game you'll see reiterated in other ways throughout from here on. But anyway, a design that fits this sentiment is a simple, self-sufficient technique meter resource that can be built up and earned through efficient and successful play, while of course, Spirit Emblems could still be used to enhance the same actions into more powerful, maybe even more particularly potent uses. A bit more on that later though too. That all said, this technique resource could even be used for more than actions that require Spirit Emblems. It could also be used to enhance many of Wolf's universal core actions, ideally expanding his moveset where it happens to lack, which I'm going to talk about now. Oh, but on a quick note before continuing, ninjutsus running on Spirit Emblems is fine, as their usefulness to cost ratio is balanced out. and it makes sense. Well, it's believable anyway that magic superpowers are fueled by souls. Why I need them to, like, unlatch a spring in my arm? I don't know. Jesus, guide my shinobi prosthetic, I guess. Or Amaterasu, guide it, please. But anyway, as Sekiro is primarily an action game, I found there to be much lacking in terms of growth to Wolf's overall capabilities, mainly meaning his ever-present actions like the step dodge or deflect, and that even with the game's adventure-inclined design, that there was room for unique customization among his core actions. While a player may never feel the game lacks in terms of Wolf's core capabilities as the game is finely tuned to what he's got, and man, that deflect feels real good, there's still room to layer additional actions, utility, and properties onto existing options and combat states that could afford some advanced gameplay scenarios, and to beef Wolf up in some way more noticeable way. Cause like, good god, the only thing that felt strong by the end of this game was my health bar and my mistake cup. Personally, I like the idea of a character's primary growth existing in property additions rather than simply boosting power, though there's nothing wrong with that if the right number is getting boosted. So, with that loose design direction in mind, here's a pretty detailed list of things that could have been different or improved in this aspect. So, first of all, Makiri counter, run and slide, all mid-air enabling actions, and Breath of Light, the death blow heal, and maybe even Breath of Nature Light, the posture heal, should have been innate, or at least gained early in the game without needing to spend skill points. These skills feel to have been gutted from Wolf's kit and thrown into the skill trees for the sake of populating them, as these pieces together put Wolf at the level of capability that feels like a starting line, not a finish line. I'll get more into skills later, but these actions, along with the already existing innate actions, should naturally grow with game progress, or maybe even as an option to enhance using a memory or other unique consumable, or just simply upgradable through an option in a skill tree if such system is appropriately reworked, or maybe a combination of these with different pieces of the ability getting upgraded or added depending on how the upgrade occurs. Regardless though, these growths should appear and be substantial. So as an example, let's say the upgraded run and slide now travels significantly farther than it does now and grants invisibility during the slide, maybe requiring the Mist Raven for that property. And when I say farther, I mean like 10 times. It barely goes like, what, 3 feet if that? It needs to be felt much more than it is. And then when upgraded further, a unique death blow can be enacted during the slide, silently dragging the target with Wolf to the end of the slide and then taking them out there, allowing for advanced, exciting stealth if pulled off properly. I'm not going to talk about stealth much in this video. I could talk forever about stealth design and this game's wacky level design at times, but stealth is there, and I think it should have been an option that players could have leaned into more, even if the game is ultimately about action. And this could have definitely helped with that. Then we got the Makiri counter, which, regardless of anything in this video, I have to talk about because, on paper, this is the best ability in the game due to its universal use, ease of use, and substantial reward. So honestly, when redesigning it, I'd say its base version should be somewhat weaker than how it exists now, and instead grow into that potency, and can maybe even be upgraded to be used against grabs, albeit with a tighter timing. Grabs don't get a counter ability with a generous window to deal with them compared to the other two perilous attack answers, and considering the Makiri counter is executed via a forward step dodge, it would make sense for it to work against grabs as it's using the same button. In my mind, it looks like a disrupting shoulder charge, a chariot tackle. Now, while these skills should have been innate or mandatory core actions, let's talk about the actual core actions, starting with Wolf's held attack option, the thrust attack. First of all, A simple upgrade that increases this action's travel distance and reduces charge time would have significantly improved this game's combat, as a gap closer that doesn't consume resources or need to be equipped would have felt incredible to eventually gain, and better yet, this would simply free up combat arts and tool slots to be filled with flavor rather than necessity, a common sentiment you'll hear from here on out. Obviously, it wouldn't be as strong or quick to pull off compared to a tool or combat art variant, but at least it would always be there. Additionally, this action could even be upgraded to have unique follow-up options, maybe at the cost of the aforementioned technique resource. This could be things like a unique escape, a dodging side slash kind of like Sabimaru's, or continued thrust based on the input. And yes, I did play Devil May Cry before this game, for the record. If anything shows up in here that you're like, that sounds like a thing from a good action game, well, there's a reason for that. Maybe it could even have a rising slash to catch enemies that like to jump. Air combat isn't a major dynamic in this game, despite having a handful of options while in the air, but with more options to manage airborne opponents, it could be a major fun factor added to combat. A little bit more to say on that later. Now, while I mentioned giving the thrust attack follow-up actions, the held R1 input could be used for more than just the thrust attack, if single directional inputs, or tilt inputs as I'll refer to them, were included in this game, further expanding Wolf's universal capabilities. Now, of course, less is sometimes more, but let's just humor the possibility for now. So, before talking about what actions could share the charged attack input, let's talk about what tilt inputs are and how they could work in Sekiro, as regardless of additional charged attack options, the shinobi tools and combat arts would immensely benefit from these simple additional inputs as well. So tilts are simply pushing the movement stick in a direction and pushing a button to receive varied output of similar type. Typically for 3D operating games, the tilts used are forward tilt, backwards tilt, and neutral or no tilt, which are read in accordance to an orientation or focal point, usually meaning what's being locked onto or the character's facing direction. Now, while Sekiro lacks a camera/facing direction lock button, like how Devil May Cry's lock-on works, tilts could still be received during a brief startup window of whatever the type of action is, when not locked on, meaning you start doing the action, then you hit the tilt, then you get the tilt action, right? However, in combat, 95% of the time in Sekiro, Wolf is locked onto something. So, the more practical use would be to only allow the neutral tilt action to occur when not locked on. A shortcut system is also a decent idea, however, I think it's one too many steps for the speed this game wants to move. Okay, with that in mind, let's talk about what could be included as the tilts for the charged attack ability. So sticking with the idea of giving Wolf universal but weaker versions of existing actions from the tools and combat arts, this one will sound familiar if you've played Dark Souls, a temporary shield knockback to deal with shielded or even armored enemies if the idea of breakable equipment was further developed, would fit in well as a chargeable attack option. This could even gain crowd control properties, allowing Wolf to significantly knock lesser enemies away when used. Now, while the game isn't about optimizing damage per se, having a charge input on the attack button often means that the attack released at the end of the charge is stronger compared to a regular tapped input for one. And I don't know about you guys, but I often defaulted to performing thrust attacks, to like gap close or punish enemies, despite it not really being for that because of this predisposition. So it would make sense for one of the charged attack options to be a proper strong attack. Now, I know what you're saying. That's just what Ichimonji is, since it's so fucking good and I never took it off as my combat art except to put Whirlwind back on when there were too many enemies. Well, that's a great point, because that's exactly what my point is. Since it's so good, just have Ichimonji be the universal charged attack option, once again freeing up options to be more flavor than necessity. And then just allow for it to be upgraded to be as strong as it is. Maybe it even has upgrade options that allow for it to have a hit of armor or a damage threshold so it can power through some attacks. Also, Whirlwind Strike as a charged attack option isn't a bad idea either. Turns out, there's a lot of combat arts that feel like a natural extension to Wolf's kit. And one last one for fun, since this system doesn't exist in the game. I love the idea of being able to bat projectiles back to the sender, so a wind-up swing able to do that would be pretty fucking cool. Though, it'd probably just fit better as a superpowered risky deflect than exclusively as a return to sender ability. Yeah. Alright, that about covers the bits that for sure felt missing, but before getting into another big issue of the game, here's a quick list of additional pieces of Wolf's core that could have been expanded, even if minor. Despite mid-air action being possible, mid-air combat is barely a dynamic in this game, and airborne capabilities exist more for movement and exploration than to battle with. Some mid-air hit stop or reduced fall speed when clashing, coupled with a high jump upgrade by the end of the game, would have been exciting, as the only thing cooler than clashing swords is being in the air while doing it. Definitely something I want to see more of next time around. Also, while I'm in the air, let me Helm Splitter with the charged R1 action. God, I love Helm Splitters. Fuck. There's no Helm Splitter. Then in the same vein as the minimal mid-air action, the grappling hook was underutilized in combat, especially when the one attack option it gets rarely landed even in the like 5 times I could even use it. I guess that's the game's Helm Splitter. Like sort of, but it's like a shitty spinning top. I want to do that Levi shit, but it doesn't, you don't. Now, while the inclusion of a shinobi tool that snatches/pulls in enemies seems like a good fit and is on a lot of people's minds, gap closers work well enough for that, and this game isn't like Devil May Cry where the more enemies getting hit the better. So I feel a grapple-based shinobi tool in this game would make more sense if there was some sort of disarm mechanic or contextual environment interaction, like being able to throw debris, pull down trees or scaffolding, or even like a unique swing around attack on larger enemies. Yeah, Attack on Titan, that's just what I want. Every grappling hook should just be the shit from Attack on Titan. Like, I just want to do that, but maybe under unique circumstances. That might be too much. God, I miss Titanfall 2. Alternatively, instead of another shinobi tool, maybe hitting the grapple button on startup of certain tools produce a unique ranged version of that tool's attack. Like throwing the spear out and yanking it back, or tossing the axe up and slamming it down, creating like a big meteor explosion. And once again, the tech meter would be a good fit for something like this. While minor, different weapons or even just different swords could have been included without changing the attack animations by altering attack damage, deflect timing, posture damage to an enemy on deflect, posture damage received when blocking, and even attack reach based on the weapon's length to allow for some minor variation in playstyle. Maybe the different weapons have unique held R1 actions as well. I could also see this idea working for the step dodge, allowing for a slightly better dodge to be equipped at some point, one that's invincibility window is much larger at the cost of significantly higher recovery and no follow-up attack. Though, regardless of that, thinking about it now, the step dodge is a stagnant mechanic, and considering how weak it feels, some enhancement to that over the course of the game would have been nice. But the game isn't focused on dodging, so it's not something I feel remiss over. Alright, so let's finally dig into the systems for the skills, combat arts, and shinobi tools. So while I've mentioned a good bit for each of these systems throughout, when finally getting into the deeper, more tangible level of design for them, there's just a lot of implementation, balance, and quality of life changes that would have made this game better. But there is something I mentioned very briefly earlier when initially discussing the Spirit Emblem system that I want to reiterate here as it applies to more than just that system. One of the biggest gameplay issues in Sekiro is that despite the variety of combat options and skills available to the player, most of these choices are unquestionably outclassed by other options within their own system, as these better choices are either cost-efficient, like the firecrackers, or universally applicable, like Ichimonji, Mikiri Counter, or the firecrackers. They're really good. Now, while there is certainly room for some player preference among these combat and skill options, in a game like Sekiro, where it can be rather difficult due to its precise, considerably simple design, players are likely to take the path of least resistance, not the one they want to. Which sucks because on my second playthrough, now that I'd seen everything and, got good enough, I had a lot of fun experimenting with the range of gameplay options that I had neglected on my first playthrough, and it turns out, a lot of them are really fun to use. It just sucks I ended up getting that enjoyment through supplemental means rather than primary ones in a game that isn't big on replayability. So with that said, let's clean up each system with the action side of the game and player preference at the forefront of the designs, while still keeping the puzzle-like direction of this game in mind as well. I've mentioned a good bit on skills already, but let's dig into it a bit more here. Skill trees shouldn't be designed as a primary means of increasing a character's power and integral moveset. They should instead be designed around providing playstyle enhancement. The Ashina Arts tree is the worst offender of this, as it provides only worthwhile skills and is topped off with the cool special sword attack you'd expect to see in a game like this. So it's like, yeah, I want to light my sword on fire. That sounds awesome. I love it. The particle effects look great, the purple one especially. But that requires so many extra steps compared to just overall performing better. Plus, I might not even know I can even light my sword on fire since skill previews are locked until upgraded far enough, even though skill points are effectively a finite resource and I can't respec, which is fucking ridiculous. What if I don't care for a skill I got and now I can't get one I'd like more, and I couldn't even try it out? How am I supposed to get somewhere without clear directions? It's fine for the shinobi tool upgrades. I know which tool is where, and I can farm mats and money if I need to, no problem. But did they really expect me to pick one tree and run with it to completion? No fucking way. Actually, yeah, fucking way. I potentially have to get skills I don't even want to get ones that I do. Like, you know, the cool skill at the end of each tree. That sucks. All that sucks. What a mess. It'd be exhausting to redesign an entire skill tree system, but I believe it'd be better off reconstructed with many smaller focus trees around core actions in particular gameplay dynamics, such as stealth, healing/item use, defense, prosthetic tools extension, like kind of how much of the prosthetics tree already exists, and advanced offense. All these filled with significant property upgrades, unique skills appropriate to the dynamic, additional ways to gain tech meter, and even some metric upgrades if fitting. Oh, and more ninjutsus please. Those things are really cool. And of course, have everything viewable from the get-go. If surprising the player is important, which I think it is nice to get a surprise. Granting hidden bonus skills like unique combat art appropriate to the tree, or just little minor perks could be unlocked automatically after having enough of a tree filled out. And I should say before moving on, the skills do provide some playstyle variation, just more so in the realm of self-balance by providing options that let the player feel a bit more comfortable in certain aspects in this finely tuned difficult game. Like, upgrading healing potency might be very appealing to someone, whereas I never felt more was ever going to help me much. I actually preferred getting more spirit emblems because, god, the tools are really strong when they work. But moving on, let's knock out the combat arts really quick, as there's not much to say that hasn't been said elsewhere, I think. Here's a quick list. 1. As mentioned, combat art should be performable with tilt inputs, allowing for 3 to be equipped at a time. 2. If a technique resource was included, these actions could be enhanced or EX'd by burning meter, and advanced ones that require spirit emblems like Shadow Rush or Dragon Flash could only be performed with sufficient resource. Oh, and it should be noted, this is kind of weird, the spirit emblem combat arts can be performed when out of spirit emblems just to a significantly worse degree, which makes me wonder why tools can't be performed at all without spirit emblems. Really strange. But 3, maybe among the skill trees somewhere, individual combat arts, or maybe all combat arts or a group of combat arts, can be upgraded to gain some interesting properties. Like for example, the Whirlwind Slash getting a big knockback on the second swing that adds some crowd control to the fight. Though maybe an action like that comes from using the fan in tandem with the combat art. Yeah. That sounds more interesting than getting a skill upgrade. Or maybe you just buy the upgrade with money. If they rebalanced it, of course. Because that works too. That's pretty simple. But yeah, anywhere the tools could be synthesized with other actions, I'm all for. But then finally, 4, most importantly, don't lock the coolest combat arts behind endings in a game with little replay value. Seriously, the sickest combat art in the whole game, called One Mind, for those who don't know, is awarded for completing the Shura ending. You know, the bad ending. Don't you hide Judgment Cut from me. Don't you do it. It's all I want. If I have a katana, I want to Judgment Cut things. Okay, with that covered, let's get into the final big bit here with the shinobi tools and by extension, the adventure dynamic of combat. While Sekiro leans into an adventure-inclined design, with how explicit the tools are in their application, you aren't solving puzzles in this game as much as you are just responding to easy questions. In my opinion, I would have preferred the tools to be less definitive in their use by having a more unique spread of enemy types, so that it's never so obvious how to best deal with an enemy or situation, and that the tools should be less focused in their design in solving a single problem and instead be given a general idea of what kind of problem they can solve. So basically, while not every enemy needs a unique solution or dire weakness, there'd be a much more engaging adventure dynamic if there were actually puzzles to solve and discover. Like, being able to rip the centipede out of the headless ape's neck is the coolest shit in this game, so I just want more hidden interactions like that everywhere instead of few and far between. And that then, the general combat can be played much more free form, with the tools still finding varying degrees of success, just not to such extremes that it makes a player feel that how they want to play is insignificant to how the game wants them to play. Also, next time around, I'd like to see a stronger adventure aspect regarding environmental interaction, as it would create deeper and more engaging combat and exploration. Did you know these exploded? I had no idea. But that said, I think what we got would have been a non-issue if it was just simply implemented better. With tool changing and equipping occurring semi-frequently to adapt to a given scenario, having a 3-slot equip system doesn't make any sense, especially when a system like this is usually for equipping favorites or choosing a loadout where equipment can't be swapped on the fly. But that's not the case in Sekiro, because you can just pause the game and swap tools no problem, so why not just cut out the middleman? So instead of having 3 slots for tools that can be set inside the equipment menu or customization menu, have 2 that can be set there and 1 that's reserved for on-the-fly swapping, which can be done like this. When the tool swap button, which should be up on the D-pad by default by the way, why it's on triangle, the Bloodborne heal button, no fucking clue, but regardless, have it so that when the tool swap button is briefly held, that the game pauses and an overlay menu opens that allows for easy tool swapping for the designated slot. Inside the menu, scrolling left and right changes the tool type, and up and down changes the tool variant. Then, when exiting the menu, the just selected tool is set as the active one on Wolf's prosthetic. But of course, tapping the tool swap button still cycles through all 3. Pretty simple, right? But that aside, it's a little ridiculous how many tool variants there are for each type considering how little functional difference there is between each one. In this game, there are functionally 3 shurikens, 2 of which are basically the same, and 1 of which you'll never use. 2 firecrackers, though it's more like 1.5 as they both serve the same purpose, one type just sets off a bit later than the other. 1 axe, that just lights on fire once upgraded far enough. 2 spears, which actually have some different application. 1 Sabimaru, all you need. 1 Mistraven, that also just lights on fire at some point. Best tool. Should have a Lazlight upgrade. I just want to see the blue flames. 2 flame vents, though the charged action on both are terrible, though I actually don't know that for sure because I never used the flame sprayer one, but it's probably bad. 1 fan, or whatever the fuck it's called. Divine Spirited Away. What is it called? Whatever. It's the fan. And then there's 1.5 loaded umbrellas, with the only difference being that 1 specializes in eating fire, 1 specializes in eating fear. Wait, what? I forgot one? Oh, yeah, the whistle. Yeah, there's 1 whistle. How exciting. So while I was going to recommend the inclusion of tilt inputs, and I still am for some tools, the tools should have existed as one entity and simply gained stacking upgrades when powered up instead of creating new individual versions of the tool. Now what about the different spirit emblem costs between each variant, you might ask? Well, I'm sure you can guess my response. Fuck it. Spirit emblem cost differences be damned. Just keep it the same for each, or increase it slightly if the tool really does get that beefed up. It's not like someone's not gonna use the Lazlight axe once they have it, right? Especially considering they have maybe 2 bosses left to use it on. But if something feels to really be that different in power, having a cost difference between actions isn't too absurd. And on a quick side note, I would have preferred to get the final upgrades for things around the time of reaching Fountainhead Palace rather than roughly the 95% mark of the game. Anyway, the spear, flame vent, firecrackers, shuriken, and any tool with multiple functions if designed that way, could still use tilt inputs as to fit each variant's action into 1 tool. So this would mean every tool could have up to 6 unique actions, 3 tapped actions, 3 charged actions. So like for the spear, assuming it's completely upgraded, you could have the charged forward and neutral tilt input perform the spiral spear action, while the charged away/back tilt input performs the fire cleave. Though considering the spear has only 3 actions, charged options might not even be needed. However, it feels really cool to hold down a trigger before doing a big ol' sweep attack. The only problem I really see with tilts is that some actions like the spear's cleave or the fan can benefit from not being locked on, so some consideration would have to be paid there. But regardless, some form of combination of everything I've talked about with the tools and their implementation could clean up the system considerably. But moving on, let's get back into some fanfic and talk about the technique resource and spirit emblems one last time. With the inclusion of a technique meter, weaker versions of tool actions could exist. For example, when using technique meter in order to use the axe instead of spirit emblems, 2 swings of the axe are needed to break a shield instead of just 1. But in cases of special contextual actions like ripping the centipede out of the ape with the spear, that could still require spirit emblem use. Or maybe you just don't get the big damage, whatever works. To separate what resource is being expended, the contextual interact button, the suck in button, can be pressed on tool action startup or simultaneously when pressing the tool button to expend spirit emblems instead of meter. If no meter is available, then it defaults to spirit emblem use. If neither resource is sufficient for the action, it is not performed. I recommend this button as it really has no use in combat, so it likely wouldn't confuse players since there's no mind space given to it while in combat scenarios. Though I will say, I pray to God the controllers for the Xbox 2 and the PlayStation 0 have more than 4 shoulder buttons and instead add some more for my middle fingers, because fuck, there needs to be more buttons on the controllers now, and they should all be on the shoulder buttons. I want like a ball that has like, the normal face buttons, whatever, but the back is just... your fingers just slide right into these slots that have all of these fucking triggers. Yeah. It's like that stupid Dragon Quest slime controller. Yeah, that's the next gen. But anyway, I feel with this system, Spirit Emblem empowered tool actions should be somewhat stronger than how tool actions perform now, and technique meter version should be a bit weaker than how tool versions perform now. And of course, everything beefed up a bit to match this more frequent use of tools. Always gotta balance things. That all said, tools like Sabimaru might not need to expend spirit emblems to have a stronger version. I'd see it best to just begin consuming spirit emblems at the rate it already does once the technique meter resource is expended while using it. Sabimaru is less of a puzzle solution and more of a unique weapon extension to Wolf's kit, so maybe if anything, it just uses technique for standard swings, and then there's a souped up version that shoots poison blade beams or something anime like that. Like a poison dragon flash or something like that. Yeah, that would be pretty cool. The Loaded Umbrella and Mistraven could work as is, burning spirit emblems on use as their powerful defensive tools, with maybe expending technique resource with continued deflex with the Umbrella once deployed, or for unique follow-up actions with the Mistraven, like that Helm Splitter I want. You can fly into the air with it in the game, give me that Helm Splitter, damn it. I want to fly up into the air of a fire pillar, and then do a fire plunger attack. That said though, with these two tools being advanced defensive options, I don't think they should even be a part of the equipable tools as they have universal application, and fuck man, the Mistraven is so cool and I wanted to use it so much! They'd be better off equipable as combat arts, it tilts on the combat arts, or better yet, hitting the Spirit Emblem burn button along with a block or dodge just activates them instead. Hitting circle and square at the same time would suck though. Well, in that case, triangle should have been the contextual interact button, so circle and triangle can easily be hit at once, then square could be the item use button. Like every other recent From Software game's item use button. And then, as said, up on the D-pad for tool swapping. Yeah. I actually don't need 2 more shoulder buttons on the controllers, I need 1 that's exclusively for EXing actions in Sekiro. And with that, let's wrap it up even though I probably missed a bunch of stuff. Oh god, this went on way longer than I thought it would have. It always does, though. It always does. But I wouldn't be satisfied if I was any less thorough than I usually am for things like this. So just to properly close out and to reiterate, despite everything said, Sekiro is still like a solid 9 to me on virtue of its concepts alone and how good it feels to play when it's doing what it can best. With E3 having now passed and no DLC for the game being announced, but Elden Ring being announced, which is cool, I hope that they head straight into development on a sequel for this game considering the vast room for improvement there is. And because the next game could be called Sekiro Journey to the West, and that would be the tightest shit ever. Oh man, that would be so cool. So yeah, I hope you got something out of this, and if you want to see me dig into this game more in terms of talking about the concept of difficulty or the ironic idea of artificial difficulty, then let me know, because this game has a ton of good examples to paint with all over that topic. But for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is like the most insulting fucking thing you could do to this guy.
Poor gas can. Like, people won't even say his name right.
Oh my God.